Got this comment the other day asking about my writing adventures. Brought to mind this one time after graduating with zero job prospects, I flipped my sleep cycle around and basically went into hibernation. But instead of focusing on reading and writing, I was getting up to some other shit. When you go through so much sensory deprivation or overload, it's like this post-nut clarity, you start to question what's real anymore. And it's not just in the dream of fiction, but how the world itself is the greater fiction, and which eventually led to this group of writers interested in those kinds of explorations. But the least talked about, for some reason, was the writer Claude Simon. Yeah, over the decades, I was getting so obsessed with his writing that I even fantasized about making this pilgrimage to France, especially to find this one river that he likes to write about. But then actually stepping out into the world again. It's like you have to learn everything all over, and it reminds me of this time recently coming out of quarantine and meeting this woman at a dinner party. And, normally when you shake hands, you do the 2 pumps and release. But I kind of just held onto her for some reason. Sort of like,
Never should have left the room. Never should have tried. Should have known nothing would change. Grenades left and right. Wandering around like animals getting picked off. Mind expanding like egg yolk.
It's not unlike the experience of reading Simone. At first, in our writing adventures, we want to show how depressing the world is as realistically as possible, but then you start to see the absurdity of it all, especially calling out the absurdity in the same realistic way, so that eventually you develop these really complex, almost fragmentary narrative strategies. But despite all that, it's interesting to see how sometimes the dead voices in the past kind of shoot at our feet, making us dance like puppets. But it's also interesting to see these guys snatching that style and amping it up to mind-blowing levels to where you feel like the master would have paused for a moment and taken notice. Like this book here, where Faulkner originally wanted to have this published in different colors to represent the different time periods, sort of similar to what Simone is doing with the narrative strands, to where it's almost like he's doing this with the narrative. But not only that, he makes it circle in upon itself so that it achieves this almost like pre-planned architecture that is designed to draw your eyes back towards what's happening in the center, but which we can't quite see clearly yet. Time starts to slip and memory takes over as a sort of landscape in which you can wander around in and grow your own thoughts upon until your own story starts to develop. It's like Simone provides this environment for you. He's like a scientist, and his work is more like these petri dishes, and now you can see that all these borrowed styles from Faulkner and Rougré actually were merely just tools that he was using in his own attempt to grow not just a more truthful realism with all its different fractured layers, but going beyond to where shit just gets quantum. There's something that compels you to keep on going despite all the digressions like parentheses inside parentheses, but you can only hold so much in short-term memory, and you have to have some faith that he'll take you back to the surface and close all the parentheses that have been opened up. Otherwise, you'll drown in the subcurrents. I actually recommend letting it wash over you at first and not trying too hard to find this submerged structure underneath, the remains of which are from the battles that Simone had been waging against the problems of fiction with his constant discontent. You can always go back to his work later, but what I think you'll find is that in your absence, the work had shifted and reconfigured itself so that it's like a whole new animal. Even though, like, on the surface, it can be very precise and clinical, there's this overall slipperiness. It's almost like this mutation from a virus that got passed along, and you start to see this familiar shape again. Maybe she'd been in the background this whole time, but, you tried to forget, and the thing is, it's happening again.
It is happening again.
I have this place in mind. It's somewhere between the border of France and Belgium, where Simone and his ancestors fought in wars, but in my mind, it's like a paradise, mostly because of the name of this river. It's an alternate country as if conjured up by Kafka or Gerald Murnane. reading books alone at night in my room, but at the same time, walking alongside her. You start to see this place show up in other books, and you get so excited knowing that other authors have been there as well. And I thought this book would be a good shadow book to the Flanders Road, similar to how The Opposing Shore is a shadow book to the Tartar Steppe. And it's also translated by the same person. And you can start to see the same female personage show up. And this is usually where the caffeine kicks in, because I'll start dog-earing the page. But as I was reading this book, I noticed that it had already been dog-eared throughout. And I was like, what the fuck? Did I already read this and have no memory of it? And that's something that Gerald Murnane likes to talk about, is measuring the effectiveness of a book based on how well it stays in memory, which is a little bit ironic because some of his books I've read, I've completely forgotten about. But this guy, he's definitely no stranger to the same female personage. But as you go from window to window, sometimes this happens. I dropped this, and I figured I'd give this one a try because it's a little bit more stretched out, so you get a little bit more text per line, and which reminds me of the time when we used to go into the office to work, and sometimes I'd read books on caliber so that the window would span across 2 monitors. And so the line of text would be even longer, and you get this kind of spaghettification of the text. So then I start to think, well, what if we made this circular cubicle of monitors all lined up next to each other? Your head gets so twisted that you convince yourself that by reading so much, you're also somehow being creative. But in the back of your mind, you wonder how long you can stay in the fantasy. Tried so hard to keep it up, but what you really ended up doing was handing that ass up to the next one in line with the bow on top. Could have been anyone, stable boy, the guy at the bookstore, anyone but you. What's even more fucked is you got off on it. Decades pass, and when you finally make it over there by yourself, you come to see that it was just a river like any other. Wandering the road of life, all you ever wanted was to get a nut. But the world was cruel. Sometimes the world isn't meant for you. You have to let go of these stories. You have to let go of make-believe. You have to let go of her. I look inside myself and I don't like what I see. But what happens when the world has become a reflection of what you are inside? Even the books that you read, when the words which once gave you life now only make you feel skinned alive. It's time to stop dreaming. And yet,